Very excited now to be joined by Brandon Weichert. He's a longtime friend of mine, and he is the senior national security editor at 1945.com. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So, Brandon, you've been a longtime expert really here looking at munitions, U.S. defense readiness, and we have a lot of things to talk to you about. First is some major breaking news, guys. We can go ahead and put it up here on the screen. We are getting reports now from the United States is going to be moving parts of THAAD anti-missile systems from South Korea to the Middle East, in addition to multiple Patriot interceptors from across the Indo-Pacific. So, Brandon, this is something you and I had predicted at the very outbreak of the war. We're only about 10 days or so into this, already cannibalizing stockpiles for a much more geopolitically important part of the U.S. interest. But more importantly, what does this say about U.S. defense stockpiles, readiness, and how the war is going with Iran right now?
Well, it certainly puts to bed the claim by Hegseth and runs counter to it that we have total control over the situation and we're doing so much American amazing, rah-rah, blowing up things. Well, ultimately, we've blown through our critical stockpiles in CENTCOM. The report before the war began was that CENTCOM had, for a high-tempo war, about 8 days worth of these weapons that we needed before we would need to start cannibalizing it. So we're at day 10, so we got a couple of days out of it, but this is an indicator that the war is not going well and certainly not winning anything. And in fact, now we are starting to weaken our standing in the Indo-Pacific. And I just want to point out that when these reports started surfacing around day 4, there was a South Korean leader who said that the South Korean government feels like they've been, quote, betrayed by the United States. And so this, again, repeats the Kissinger line that to be an enemy of America is dangerous, but to be a friend of America is fatal.
Yeah.
I wanted to get your reaction to a post I saw this morning from Professor Robert Pape. He says Iran war strategic results of 10 days of bombing. Attack Iran leads to regional war, leads to global impact. War spread to 14 countries. Oil crisis. Iran retains 50% plus missiles. Iran retains enriched uranium. Regime hardening, not collapsing. U.S. gas prices up about 20%. I mean, do you agree more or less with that assessment?
Yeah, I think Pape has been on the money with a lot of what he's been saying too. So basically yesterday we saw President Trump, try to, I think, goose the markets a little bit using the presidential pulpit to say, hey, no, I might end this thing, but he has no intention of ending it. I've said since January, we're going to war, and the president is for whatever reason, is deeply committed to this particular conflict. And I don't believe for a second he has any intention of ending it until he achieves what he said he wanted to achieve, which was regime change, which, as Cigar, I'm sure you know as well, that's not going to happen with our current force posture and certainly with our current armaments. We are not in a position to do World War III, which is what this is becoming. And one other thing, be watching the Horn of Africa as well as the Houthis get involved. There is a possibility the Ethiopians will mobilize to hit Eritrea's coastline to allow for the U.S. and possibly Israelis to mount land-based missile launchers there to better attack the Houthis. So this could spread into the Horn of Africa over the coming weeks as well.
Yeah, good flag there. We also wanted to get some of your expertise in terms of the damage. So let's put D1 up here on the screen, for example. Here you found apparent damage from Iranian strikes to several THAAD sites at U.S. and allied bases. The U.S. had moved more of exactly what we're talking about, considering relocating this battery from South Korea. Brandon, can you describe for the audience the level of intelligence and targeting that it takes to actually be able to hit and to cripple some of these things? And then also talk about the asymmetry in terms of the drone and or missile costs as opposed to the actual cost of some of these batteries.
Well, let's start with that last part first, because that's the easiest thing to explain. You're basically trying to hit a $100,000 at best drone with a missile that's a couple $1 million. And as I noted, we don't have a lot of those anyway. So what the Iranians have done very deftly, and this is part of their strategy, has been to get us to expend critical munitions against these cheaper drones, so that when it's time for the Iranians to go ham with their much more advanced missiles, which they haven't even really started popping off yet, but when it's time for that to occur, there will be less of a chance that we can shoot them down. You've also noticed the Iranians attacking high-end radar systems throughout the region. This is to create a channel with which they can send these higher-end missiles through when the time is right. The level of intelligence involved is significant because they have to have people on the ground at all times, basically keeping an eye out on what the Americans are up to. Also, don't discount the presence of Russian and Chinese assistance in the form of intelligence assistance. We know the Chinese are helping the Iranians range targets with their higher-end satellite constellations in orbit. So the fact of the matter is that we are basically laying supine in the region while the Iranians, pick at us like the Lilliputians did to Gulliver.
Wow.
I mean, the whole thing seems so insane because I'm no military expert, but I mean, first and foremost, if you tell me war in the Middle East, the first thing I'm going to think of is oil. Second of all, we've watched the way that these drones have been deployed to great effect in Ukraine. So that seemed, we've been talking here about this interceptor math for, at this point, years.
3 years.
And, so I know that top military officials were aware of the danger of this landscape because before Trump launched this war, they were leaking to every outlet they possibly could that this was a bad idea and that there were all sorts of vulnerabilities here. So what, in your mind, accounts for this just total strategic failure and failure to plan on even the most basic level?
Well, if you remember, Vice Admiral Kocher, on the eve of the war, was relieved of his post with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs because he actually leaked the very contentious meeting that General Kane, the chairman, had with President Trump because Trump wasn't listening to the generals about how dangerous this could be. So that's how significantly opposed to this conflict the upper echelon of the uniformed leadership has been. In fact, I think my theory is Kocher actually did that at the request of Kane, which is why Kocher has not been fired fully. He has been simply removed from the Pentagon, and he's now working in another capacity, a lesser capacity. The fact of the matter is the president is deeply committed to this war, and I think this probably has something to do with his relationship with Netanyahu. I think this probably has to do also with the deal that was struck between himself and Miriam Adelson in June of 2024 to get the endorsement and the backing of the Zionist element of the Republican Party. Remember, a lot of the Zionists had turned on Trump after 2020. In fact, remember, Trump and Bibi hated each other after 2020 because Trump blamed Bibi for calling up Biden and congratulating him, one of the first leaders. So it's a sort of a weird friendship now, and that was nursed by Miriam Adelson. And I think they were sort of feathering that particular bed with all of these deals the Trump family has been creating with a lot of Israeli. I think there's a telecommunications firm. There's a lot of Israeli business ties now between the Trump family. And I think that Trump just is enmeshed in this sort of Israeli worldview, and he thinks, hey, we got to protect Israel, and there might be something else with the Epstein files, who knows, but there's definitely, I think the president is being pulled by his nose by Netanyahu and the Likudniks in Israel.
Just so people who are watching this, Brandon's not a liberal. He's
at all.
Brandon and I met because he's a Steve Bannon war room guy. Just so everybody understands, in case that they're confused about some of your analysis, which makes you more courageous, by the way, for actually saying.
Yeah, you should see the hate mail I've gotten from certain people at Mar-a-Lago.
Right there with you, brother. But here's the thing: I've seen significant amount of pushback on you, Brandon, and they say, Brandon, you're an idiot. The idea that Iran is achieving its war aims is preposterous, and in fact, we've seen a dramatic lessening in the number of missiles and drones. Secretary Hegseth was at the podium today. General Kane saying the same thing. We have D4, if we want. We can put that on the screen. This was a graphic that was going around, which actually shows the amount of munitions being fired by everybody. So, you could say Israeli strikes are down, but, U.S. strikes also kind of down as well. So what's your counter to that? Iranian missiles have been, Trump said 90% have been eliminated, only a few drones. Is there any truth to it from your independent analysis?
Like I said to Steve the other day, we have degraded certain capabilities in Iran. The Iranians knew this was coming. So what they spent several years doing was decentralizing their command and control capability. So they had basically field commanders with a lot of missiles and drones. They were given final orders. If a certain event like the killing of Khamenei were to happen, you are to basically initiate a prearranged orders in a sequence, and it will basically ensure that we are combat effective. And what I would say also is, it's an interesting fact, I looked this up the other day, the U.S. Air Force flew 5.29 million sorties in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. And that was with a full, massive army on the ground fighting for a decade, and we still lost Vietnam. Why? Because our strategy did not comport with the realities on the ground, and it did not comport with ends, ways, means. The Iranian strategy is very simple: survive. That's all the regime has to do, and it has done that. Whereas the Americans are sort of flittering about saying, well, we want regime change, but then we also want denuclearization, but then we want to get rid of the ballistic missiles too, and oh, we want to degrade the Navy and get rid of the Navy. And in the meanwhile, we're running out of stockpiles. The Iranians are fully aware that our stockpiles are depleting, thank you, Mr. Zelensky. They are very well aware of that, and they have calculated that into their plans. What's more, we have learned after fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq for 25 years ineffectively, you don't have to have a centralized force anymore for that force to be highly combat effective. Just ask the Taliban. So this is a sort of a larger iteration of that, with now long-range missiles. And the reason the decline has happened, frankly, is because the Iranians have basically started shifting their munitions from the older systems that were built 2011, 2012, 2013, and they're now moving up the escalation chain. Why? Because they know that the Israeli interceptors are depleted and that the Arab interceptors are depleted. So now they don't have to use as many to still get hits in. And don't forget, they have around at least 88,000 drones, but I was told the other day by an expert, actually the Iranians have so many and they've spread them so far around the country, they actually don't know how many they have. It could be 100,000 drones that they have, and they're ready to roll. And we have not destroyed those missile cities. We have hit some, but we don't actually know how many there are. So all the numbers of sorties we're flying, it's sort of random, out of context numbers to make everybody feel good about themselves.
And they're able to continue manufacturing those drones as well, correct?
They are, yes. In fact, Trump, I think, or Hegseth this morning was talking about, hey, we've got, we've taken out their missile capability, production capability. We've taken out what we can see. I mean, this is the key thing. They're underground. This is like Mao during the Chinese Civil War. They're all underground. Yeah. So we don't know. And ask anybody who served at Tora Bora in 2001, all the daisy cutters and bunker busting bombs in the world are not necessarily going to collapse hardened facilities in the mountainside. So, we don't have any idea exactly what we're destroying or how much we've destroyed. And clearly, the Iranians are still combat effective.
And so, Brandon, everything you're saying points to, so for Secretary Hegseth today will be he said today, this will be the largest day of bombing already. It's like Mac v. Tehran, basically, in the way that they're talking, like you said. But, I mean, everything is pointing towards some sort of ground force having to enter maybe for a mission accomplished victory, right? So they go in and they take the nuclear material. But what we're learning is that what people are saying is that, you could send Delta Force in, but you're going to have to send a lot of people up around to protect them, a lot of air cover and everything. That potentially could involve thousands of U.S. ground troops. How do you see any sort of even limited ground operation going now that the Iranians know that they might be coming, prepared, they could create a death trap?
Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. I think we're walking into oblivion if we do this. The newest idea out of Lindsey Graham, which he probably got while polishing Netanyahu's shoes, is that we're going to take Karg Island. Well, Karg Island, okay, that's a very hardened facility. It's going to require a lot of forces to take and hold. There's going to be a significant battle. The environmental damage, if we blow things up there, because it's a massive oil production center, could be worse than what we saw in Tehran. That will affect the region for decades. So yay, America. And then also, there's the talk about sending in U.S. Special Forces, which we might already be there. I don't know now, but I think we might already be there. But sending U.S. Special Forces into Iran to link up with organized resistance groups, such as the Mujahideen Khalq, MEK, to replicate what we did in Afghanistan 01, when we basically sent a bunch of Special Forces A-teams and CIA paramilitaries augmented by U.S. air power to basically serve as force multipliers for the locals to overthrow the government. But ultimately, the MEK is highly unpopular in Iran itself. Furthermore, they don't have anywhere near the combat effectiveness that the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan did at the height of its power in 01. And also, it's a totally different kind of territory and topography. And again, you can't take a country that with 96 million people with a handful of special forces teams. It's just going to get a lot of people killed, and it's going to further enmesh the United States. And if I can just add here, this is why I believe, and if you look at the damage in Israel, I believe the Israelis are getting ready to pop off a nuke. I really do. And I think this is a very dire moment in the history of our country, because we are highly tethered to this insane policy. It's not our own policy. We're not writing it. This is the Israelis writing it. For us.
But yet, I mean, to your point, Trump seems very committed to it. So if they persuade him or not, he's all in. And some of the reporting is that, he was really pushing in this direction over and beyond.
In January,
a bunch of his
he was definitely, in fact, in January, my understanding is on January 15th, he had to be talked out of hitting them in Iran, both by Mohammed bin Salman and Netanyahu. So... he's deeply committed.
Well, I want to ask you more though about, this pretty provocative comment you just made, that you're worried that Israel is going to pop off maybe a tactical nuclear weapon.
Yeah, low yield.
What makes you, what gives you that concern? What makes you think that they could be heading in that direction?
The situation in Israel is dire. It is not being adequately reported. I hope that I'm wrong on that. I used to think that was crazy talk, but if you look at what's going on and how the Israelis are responding with the censorship and the threats online, the threats that I've received, I mean, I'm nobody, but yet they're taking the time to send very interesting notes to me and hack my Gmail. And anyway, but. So clearly there's more to the story, and they just tried, it sounds like, to kill someone close to Netanyahu, his brother. I don't know if they did manage to do that, but ultimately the situation in Israel is dire, and we know that the Israelis do have that Samson option, that if all is lost, they will start cooking off nukes against their perceived foes. And the Iranians are their number one perceived foe, and they're very annoyed with us because we're not, in their eyes, hitting hard enough, which is absolutely insane. I mean, we've thrown literally everything now at the Iranians, and they're still pushing along.
Do you worry about the U.S. deploying nuclear weapons? Because Trump has sort of boxed himself into a corner now, where even if he wants to taco, the Iranians are like, no, we're in this thing. You wanted this war. We're gonna be here until you sustain enough pain that you do not do this to us again. So is there a logical sequence that leads to us also being like,
Tucker asked me about this, and as I said to him, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, nah, it's not, we are not going to do that. But looking at the odd way that Trump is married to Netanyahu's worldview, I wouldn't put it past the man, because he keeps talking about how we're going to go so big. It's going to be the biggest thing ever. We're going to break them. Well, they're not breaking, and killing the last leader and his small grandchildren and now having his son take over probably is not the best way to get a deal. That's kind of putting the counterparty in an impossible, mindset. They're not going to negotiate. Why would they? So the only way out of this then becomes escalation, and the ultimate escalation would be nuclear weapons. And it's not in the realm of impossibility. We saw this play out in the India-Pakistan war last year, where basically the Indians started attacking the Kurna Hills nuclear weapons facility in Pakistan because the Pakistanis were resisting better than what they had anticipated, and that's when Trump had to get involved. So we've seen world leaders start to tease and look at, well, maybe the nuclear option is somehow palatable. And my hope is that somebody stops Trump if he is thinking about this.
Well, the other thing that was flagged to
Crazy
me,
to be in that
Brandon,
place.
was not just a nuclear weapon, but potentially an atmospheric test, which would be similarly unfathomable, but a message that could be sent. I actually could see that easily. And
I could too.
It would that actually I think is the most realistic option in the immediate.
Yeah, that could be. And Cigar, they love to talk about how these tests for nukes are pre-planned months in advance and blah blah blah. The president can cancel it the minute before it goes off if it was really just a pre-planned thing. So that's going to always be the excuse. But ultimately, I really do think we are in a very dangerous point in terms of releasing the nuclear genie from its bottle.
Terrifying.
Last thing we wanted to ask you about is casualties, guys. Can we go ahead and put D5 up there on the screen? So right now, this is from reporting from the Wall Street Journal. In addition to the 7 U.S. military personnel killed in the war confirmed so far, 8 have been seriously wounded. Those numbers do not include all American servicemen who have been hurt. We are hearing at least some reports that the current number is classified. Secretary Hegseth declined to actually give the total number. Do you think that they're hiding casualties? What do you think?
I hate to say it because I have a lot of people I know in the military, and I don't like to think that we are hiding these things, but I do believe this is Ukraine all over again, where we were hiding real casualty figures. I think the casualty figures are significantly worse. Look at what happened to Bahrain. Look at the Fifth Fleet's headquarters. Just look at that. That's our primary logistics hub in the region. It's a moonscape. It looks like Gaza now. So I can imagine there were people still on station there because you can't fully abandon it. I know we reduced our footprint as best we could, but I believe our casualties are probably significantly higher. And what will happen, I think, is they will eventually release them, but they will do it at a slower pace so that it doesn't shock the world news, markets. And so that's where I think we are, and I think it is a tragedy. And honestly, this is the president's fault. I mean, the president chose to do this, and I do believe that we're going to need to have a reckoning politically. Because this is not what MAGA wanted. This is not what we voted for. This isn't certainly what I dedicated a decade of my life to supporting. It was supposed to be no new Middle East wars. And we are now at the cusp, I think, of World War III.
Yeah, well, he says MAGA is whatever he says it is. So.
Well, then that's a cult.
Yeah. Agreed.
Maybe it was the whole time.
Brandon, I really appreciate it. It's really just great to get your analysis, so insightful.
Thanks for having
thank you
me.
so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brandon. Always appreciate it.
I'd love to be back.
Yeah. See you, dude.
See ya.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.